This is Daily Story, where the scariest and most haunting tales are told every day. The strange noises in the night, the silent figures in the dark, the memories no one dares to recall, all come alive here. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell, if you're brave enough. And don't forget to leave a comment, because who knows, your story might be the next haunting tale we tell. Now let's begin.
I was 25 at the time, living alone in a second-floor apartment in a quiet, leafy part of Ashwood Creek, Oregon. Life was simple, predictable. I had a decent job in graphic design, a small circle of good friends, and a routine that felt comfortable. It was into this comfortable routine that Clara walked, and in doing so, dismantled every sense of safety I would ever taken for granted. I met her through a mutual friend at a local coffee shop called The Daily Grind. A cozy place with mismatched armchairs and a constant, comforting smell of roasted beans. She was sitting by the window, sketching in a small notebook, and the afternoon light caught the subtle red highlights in her dark hair. She was attractive in a quiet, mysterious sort of way, the kind of person who seemed to be observing the world from behind a one-way mirror. Her name was Clara, and from that first conversation, I was completely captivated. Everything started out normal enough. We hung out regularly, exploring the city's hidden corners, watching old movies at my apartment, and going on long hikes in the foothills that bordered the town. We had the easy, comfortable rhythm of a new couple falling into place. But after a few months, I started noticing things small, dissonant notes in an otherwise pleasant melody. Clara was intensely private about her past. Whenever I would ask about her family or where she grew up, her answers were vague, evasive. She would change the subject with a practiced ease, claiming she did not really talk to her family anymore and that her friends were all back in her hometown. At first, I did not think much of it. Everyone has baggage. I figured she had family issues, something painful she was not ready to discuss. I respected her privacy and let it go, telling myself that in time, she would open up, but gradually, her behavior began to unsettle me. Sometimes, I would catch her staring at me when she thought I was not looking. It was not a loving gaze. It was an intense, unreadable expression, a look of profound calculation that made my skin prickle. If I caught her eye, she would offer a quick, disarming smile and laugh it off, but the feeling of her gaze lingered long after. It felt less like affection and more like assessment. She started showing up at my apartment randomly, often late at night, without calling or texting first. The first few times, I was pleasantly surprised, but it became a pattern. I would be watching TV or reading, and I would get a strange feeling, a sense of being watched. I would look out my window and see her car, a nondescript gray sedan, parked across the street, its engine off. She would just be sitting there, a motionless silhouette in the driver's seat, waiting quietly until I noticed her. When I would ask why she did not just come up or call first, she would shrug and say she liked surprising me. But the surprises were not cute anymore. They were becoming unnerving. One night, the unease solidified into genuine fear. I woke up around 3 a.m., restless and unable to sleep. I got up to get a glass of water from the kitchen. As I passed by my front window, which overlooked the street, something caught my eye. Her gray sedan was parked in its usual spot across the street, lights off, engine silent. I squinted into the darkness, my eyes adjusting, and I could just barely make out her silhouette behind the steering wheel. She was staring directly up toward my window. A cold dread, heavy and visceral, pooled in my stomach. My gut screamed that something was fundamentally wrong, but my logical mind kept trying to find a rational explanation. She is just overly attached. It is a little weird, but it is not dangerous. I went back to bed, telling myself I would talk to her about boundaries the next day. When I brought it up casually the following afternoon, she seemed unfazed, almost amused. She brushed it off with a light laugh, saying she just missed me so much and liked feeling close to my apartment. I let it slide again, choosing to believe her explanation over my own growing intuition. It was a mistake I would come to regret. Things escalated quickly after that. A week later, I came home from work to find her sitting on the stairs outside my apartment door. She looked tense, nervous, her hands fidgeting in her lap. Before I could even ask why she was there, she stood up abruptly, her movements sharp and frantic. "You need to come with me," she insisted, her voice tight. "Right now." She told me it was important, an emergency, but would not explain further. She just kept urging me toward her car, which was parked at the curb, the engine running. My instinct screamed at me to stay put, to demand an explanation. But I hesitated, confused and thrown off by her uncharacteristic panic. Still, something deep inside me, a primal sense of self-preservation, told me not to get in that car. When I firmly said I was not going anywhere until she explained what was going on, her expression changed. The nervousness vanished, replaced by a quiet, cold anger that was more terrifying than her panic. Without another word, she turned and quickly walked away, climbing into her car and speeding off without a backward glance. Shaken and deeply disturbed, I went inside and bolted my door, my mind racing to understand what just happened. After that bizarre encounter, I finally admitted to myself that this was not just quirky behavior. I needed space from Clara, and I needed it now. But before I could even bring it up to her, I received a strange text message from an unknown number 2 days later. It was short and chillingly direct. "Stay away from Clara. She is not who you think she is." My heart began pounding against my ribs. I immediately replied, asking who it was, but I never received a response. Feeling increasingly anxious, I tried calling Clara, but her phone went straight to voicemail, which was unusual for her. That night, sleep was impossible. Anxiety kept me awake, my ears straining at every creak and groan of the old apartment building. Around 2 a.m., lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, I heard faint footsteps quietly approaching my apartment door from a hallway. My body froze, every sense on high alert. I listened, holding my breath, as someone gently tested my doorknob, turning it slowly, hopefully. When they realized it was locked, the footsteps quietly retreated. I crept carefully to my bedroom window, which had a view of the street below, and peered through a crack in the blinds. I was just in time to see Clara hurriedly slipping into a car, not her gray sedan, but a dark color van parked a block down the street. 2 other shadowy figures were waiting inside. A cold, paralyzing dread set in. This was no longer about a clingy girlfriend. This was something far more sinister. I spent the following morning online, a desperate man searching for answers. I started digging through Clara's social media pages, which I would never really looked at closely before. At first glance, everything seemed ordinary photos of landscapes, books, and coffee. But when I searched her name more thoroughly, cross-referencing it with a few details she would let slip about her past, I found something that made my blood run cold. Buried deep in the archives of an old news website from rural Kansas, dated 3 years earlier, was a small article. Clara was not her real name. It was Leah. The article described the recent arrest of a kidnapping ring that had been targeting young adults around the Topeka area. They lured their victims into cars using young, attractive women as bait, and there, attached to the article, was Leah's mugshot. It was unmistakably her, despite the different hair color and a harder, colder look at her eyes. She had been arrested but was later released due to insufficient evidence. The article mentioned that the rest of the gang had likely relocated, and Leah, now calling herself Clara, had somehow made her way to Ashwood Creek, Oregon. The realization of how close I would come to becoming their next victim hit me like a physical blow. The frantic attempt to get me in her car, the anonymous warning text, the person trying my doorknob, it all clicked into place. Panic rose in my throat, hot and suffocating. I immediately called the Ashwood Creek police, my voice shaking as I told them everything I had discovered. They took a report, promising they would look into it, and advised me to be cautious, to lock my doors and avoid any contact with her. For the next few days, I barely slept. I was a prisoner in my own apartment, constantly watching the street from my window, jumping at every sound. I did not see Clara or her car again, and eventually my raw nerve anxiety began to ease slightly. But just as I started to think it was over, another message arrived, this time from a different unknown number. You should not have told the police. Big mistake. My stomach twisted into a knot of pure terror. That night, I packed a small bag, left a message to my landlord, and drove to stay with a friend in Silver Falls, an hour away. I did not want to spend another night in that apartment alone. But even there, I did not feel safe. Every time headlights swept past the windows, I froze, convinced they had found me. I never heard directly from Clara again, but months later, I was scrolling through the news online when a local headline caught my eye. Kidnapping attempt foiled near Ashwood Creek University. The article detailed the arrest of 3 individuals connected to an attempt to abduct a college student. And there, once again, was Leah's name in her now familiar mugshot, along with 2 men I would never seen before. They had tried to abduct someone not far from where I used to live. But this time, a witness had intervened, and the police had arrived in time. But the most chilling part was buried deep in the police report mentioned in the article. They had searched the suspects' phones and found detailed notes on several people, all apparently targets, complete with addresses, work schedules, and personal details. My name was on that list. They had been planning this for weeks, patiently waiting for the right moment. I moved out of Oregon shortly after that, needing a fresh start somewhere far away, somewhere anonymous. But even now, years later, in a small town in Montana, I find myself double-checking the locks on my doors and glancing nervously over my shoulder whenever I am out alone at night. I constantly question people's intentions, never fully trusting anyone new I meet. Because the truth is, even though Leah or Clara or whatever she calls herself now is behind bars, the terror of knowing I was just moments away from vanishing without a trace has never truly faded. This incident happened to my mother, Elena, when she was just 20 years old. She was in college at the time, and to earn some extra money during her summer vacation, she took a job at a small PCO and STD call office. It was a tiny, cramped space tucked away on a busy street in the coastal city of Port Blossom, a place that did not require many employees. Her boss, a man primarily involved in real estate, had his main office connected to the PCO, where a bustling team of his other employees worked. My mother, however, mostly worked alone in the quiet, glass-fronted booth. Her shift began in the morning and ended in the early evening, around 5 or 6. It was usually a mundane job, dealing with a slow but steady stream of customers making local or long-distance calls. One afternoon, a man walked in. He looked to be in his late 50s or early 60s, with distinguished white hair, a neatly trimmed white beard, and he was wearing a crisp navy blue shirt. He had an air of quiet confidence about him. The office had a glass front, so you could see clearly in and out, and my mother had noticed him before he entered, striding purposefully down the sidewalk. The man came in to use the PCO. After his call, he approached my mother's desk and started making small talk. He had a warm, engaging smile. He asked if she was related to the boss, and when she said no, he began complimenting her, telling her she was very beautiful and seemed highly educated and intelligent. He then mentioned that she did not belong in such a small, dusty office and claimed he could easily get her a job as a teller at a popular, well-respected bank nearby, as he had some powerful connections there. He introduced himself as Mr. Alistair Finch and told her to bring her resume to his home that evening to discuss her education and the job prospects further. My mother, though flattered, felt a flicker of unease about going to a stranger's house. Sensing her hesitation, he quickly added that his elderly, sick father lived with him, along with a full-time servant who took care of the house and his father. He claimed his house was right across the road, in a relatively new, upscale building where mostly wealthy people lived. Trusting his reassuring demeanor and the promise of a better job, she agreed to meet him after her shift ended. Before leaving, he gave her his telephone number and advised her not to tell anyone at the office about their conversation, explaining that it would be awkward if her current boss thought she was planning to leave. This seemed reasonable to my mother, so she agreed. That evening, after her shift, My mother crossed a road and entered the building's compound to meet the man. She saw him standing near the entrance, next to a middle-aged woman and two young children in school uniforms, who had likely just returned from school. At first, she was not sure if it was the same man, because his hair and beard were now dyed a stark jet black, and he was wearing a casual t-shirt instead of the formal shirt from earlier. But then he waved at my mother when he noticed her, his smile just as warm as before. The man introduced my mother to the woman, and their interaction seemed very friendly and familiar, making my mother assume the woman was his wife and the children were his. They all walked inside the building's lobby together, and the man asked my mother to follow them. They all got into the elevator, while the man pressed a button for his floor. My mother did not notice which button the woman pressed. When the elevator stopped on the 5th or 6th floor, the woman and the children got out. My mother, still assuming this was their destination, started to step out too, but the woman chuckled and told her, "Oh no, dear, this is not his floor." The man remained inside the elevator, his smile unwavering. My mother realized with a jolt that the woman was not his wife after all, and she quickly got back inside, a renewed sense of unease creeping over her. In the elevator, the man mentioned that he worked in Singapore and mostly stayed out of the country because of his job. When they finally reached the 11th floor where the man lived, he stepped out first, and my mother followed. She saw 2 or 3 young children playing in the square-shaped corridor, which had 2 doors on either side, with the elevator and staircase in the middle. The man walked to the door closest to the elevator, unlocked it, and invited my mother inside. She noticed the kids were still playing in the corridor as she stepped over the threshold. The living room was clean and sterile, with stark white walls, a large L-shaped sofa, a TV, and a teapot on a small table next to a bottle of a cold drink. On the table, she also saw a packet of black hair dye and a brush, as if he had just finished coloring his hair. The man asked if she minded him closing the door, but my mother, while being respectful, asked him to keep it open. He complied without argument. He then offered to show her the house before they discussed the job. She agreed, and he led her through a doorway beside the sofa into a small, dark passage. My mother noticed that all the lights in the apartment were off, except for the living room. The man opened a door on the left, saying, "This is the bedroom." She peeked inside and saw a dark room with closed windows and a neatly made bed. But she also saw something else that made her feel deeply uneasy, what looked like a camera tripod standing in front of the bed. She did not see his father or the servant he had mentioned. When she asked about his father, he told her that he was out to see the doctor with the servant, which struck her as strange. If he knew his father would not be around that evening, why did he tell my mother otherwise? Feeling a surge of fear, she suggested they discuss the job now and walked back to the living room without completing the house tour. The man brought a chair from inside and sat in front of her. He asked my mother if she would like to have the cold drink that was in the teapot. She said no, but he insisted and went inside with the cold drink bottle, presumably to the kitchen, while still talking about random things, like whether my mother liked his house. He came out with 2 glasses of the cold drink in his hands and again asked my mother to have one. She took the glass to be polite, but did not drink from it. He even asked her to take a sip, but she said she would drink it later, which she never did. After that, he started talking about his job in Singapore, where he claimed to live in a much bigger flat. He mentioned how strict the laws were there, but my mother was not paying much attention. She was still trying to process the situation and her growing sense of dread. Suddenly, while talking about the harsh punishments in Singapore, he grabbed my mother's hand to demonstrate how they would cut off a thief's arm. This unnecessary, sudden touch terrified her, and she realized with chilling certainty that she was in danger. She prayed silently for a way out. The man stood up and moved towards the door while talking about his automatic door in his Singapore flat. My mother wanted to leave, but he was standing close to the door, ready to close it if she tried to escape, and the kids in the hallway would not have noticed. They were so busy playing, and besides, they were just children. At that moment, she realized she had made a huge mistake by coming to this man's place, but she thought it was too late now. But then, something unexpected happened. The two closed doors on the other side of the corridor opened, and two women, probably the mothers of the children playing outside, stepped out and started calling their children. When they noticed each other, they stepped out of their doorways and began chatting right near the man's open door. This distraction gave my mother a chance to escape. The women caught the man off guard, and maybe they even saw my mother inside. She quickly stepped out of the flat, saying in a rush, "I am getting late, and I need to get home on time, or my mom will kill me." She did not even wait for the elevator and took the stairs instead, running down all 11 flights. The man tried to stop her, calling after her, but she just told him she would meet him the next day, which was a lie. When my mother finally reached home, shaken, she decided not to escalate the situation and kept it to herself. The next day, she was scared to go to work, but did. Her boss, who usually stayed in his cabin, unexpectedly came to her and asked if she had met the man from the day before. She admitted she had, and he asked if the man did anything inappropriate. She said no. After a few more questions, her boss warned her to stay away from him, saying he was not a good man and that she should not go with him or visit his place again. My mother agreed. She still does not know how her boss knew about the incident or if he knew the man personally. Nothing unusual happened during her shift, but later, as she was returning home, she saw the man standing outside his building, seemingly waiting for her. She managed to avoid him, but he noticed her and sent his servant to stop her. The servant tried to convince her to talk to the man again, but my mother refused and got into a taxi. She decided to leave the job right then, since her vacation was ending soon anyway. A few years later, she read in the newspaper about an old man in his 60s who was arrested in another city for drugging and sexually assaulting a young woman. He had a history of similar crimes, including inappropriately recording his victims to blackmail them. It was the same man. When she realized that all his victims were my mother's age, in their early 20s, she was terrified. But she never told anyone until after she married my dad. She shared this story with me just last year, still considering herself incredibly lucky that those women appeared that day, saving her from a similar, terrible fate. This story happened to me and my sister, Chloe, 20 years ago. I am only telling it now because she passed away recently from an illness, and in a way, this feels like honoring a piece of our shared history, no matter how terrifying it was. 2 years after my parents' messy divorce, I finally decided to leave my mother's house and move in with my dad and older sister in rural southern Vermont. My father owned a large, isolated piece of land, completely surrounded by a thick, imposing forest of pine and maple trees. The house itself was a 2-story building with a damp, unfinished basement, a dark, dusty attic, and a beautiful wraparound porch that offered stunning views of the woods. Despite its size and potential charm, it had been designed specifically for my stepmother, a deeply unpleasant person who had tormented us throughout our childhood with a chilling blend of psychological cruelty and occasional physical punishments. For years, visits to that house were dreaded events, marked by a constant, stomach-churning anxiety. Thankfully, my dad divorced my stepmother during my junior year of high school. Chloe immediately chose to move in with him after their separation. I decided to wait until I graduated before joining them. Initially, I believed the house would feel different, lighter, without my stepmother's oppressive presence. But I quickly realized that something was still very, very wrong there. My bedroom was on the second floor, right next to Chloe's. Her room held the only access to the attic, a pulled-down ladder in her ceiling that led to a dark, unfinished space we seldom entered. Not long after I settled in, we started hearing strange noises from up there at night. Initially, it sounded like small, hurried footsteps, like a squirrel or a chipmunk scampering across the attic floor. Chloe and I often joked nervously about the attic sprites, blaming the odd noises on imaginary creatures to cope with our unease. When we told our dad, he dismissed our worries with a wave of his hand, assuring us it was probably just rats or squirrels that had gotten into a loose board. However, as the weeks passed, the activity grew more frequent and more troubling. At first, it was just the footsteps. Soon after, doors began opening randomly throughout the house, seemingly without explanation. There were nights when I would be reading or watching TV in the living room, and I would suddenly hear a faint creak from upstairs, followed by the slow, deliberate squeak of a door swinging open. Every time I went to check, I would find an empty hallway and no logical reason for the open doors. One particular evening is forever etched in my memory. Chloe and I were sitting downstairs, watching a movie together. Around midnight, she yawned and decided it was time for bed. I was too engrossed in a late-night show, so I stayed behind on the couch. About 10 minutes after she went upstairs, I clearly heard footsteps descending slowly down the main staircase. Thinking Chloe had forgotten something, I did not pay much attention at first. But then, I heard the basement door creak open. Confused, I stood up and walked toward the hallway. Standing at the top of the dark basement stairs, I called out, "Chloe, you need something?" Silence was my only answer. My heart beat a bit faster as I leaned forward, flipping the switch for the basement lights. The bare bulb at the bottom of the stairs illuminated the steep, wooden steps, but nobody was there. Feeling a prickle of unease, I quickly closed the basement door and double-checked that it was latched securely. Now unsettled, I decided it was best to just head upstairs and try to get some sleep. My bedroom door had always been a bit tricky. The house's settling had caused it to pinch against the frame. It required a good tug or a firm push to open or close fully. That night, I made sure to pull the door tight and secure it shut before climbing into bed. I left my window slightly open to let in the cool evening air, try and convince myself that everything was fine. A little past 1 in the morning, I was startled awake by footsteps again. This time, they were louder, more frantic, and moved quickly up the wooden staircase. I sat bolt upright in bed, frozen, listening as they moved down the hallway toward Chloe's room. Her door creaked open loudly, then slammed shut moments later. My heart raced, and I felt a wave of pure, cold fear wash over me. Suddenly, the footsteps hurried back down the hall, straight toward my room. I braced myself. To my horror, something or someone slammed forcefully into my door, rattling it violently against its stubborn frame. The impact was so strong it shook the wall. Terrified, I jumped out of bed, standing frozen in the middle of the room, breathless with panic. The footsteps swiftly retreated, rushing back toward Chloe's room. I heard her attic door open forcefully, the sound of the ladder dropping, followed by hurried steps running up into the attic. My eyes widened as the footsteps raced across the attic floor, directly above my head, moving toward the small attic window that overlooked the roof of the wraparound porch. Then a loud, heavy thud echoed from outside, as if someone or something had landed heavily on the porch roof. Shaking with fear, I ran quickly to my window, slammed it shut and locked it securely. Peering desperately out into the dark, I saw nothing but the familiar shapes of the trees and the moonlight reflecting eerily off the porch shingles. A few seconds later, I heard my sister's shaky voice at my door. "Are you messing with me?" she said, her voice tight with anxiety. I opened my door quickly, relieved to see her standing there, but she looked as shaken as I felt. "No," I replied, my own voice trembling. "Are you messing with me?" She shook her head rapidly. She told me the violent banging on my door had jolted her awake. Afterward, she would heard her bedroom door, and then her attic door open in rapid succession, followed by the sound of running footsteps. Terrified, she would stayed hidden under her blankets, afraid to move until it had finally gone quiet again. Neither of us could sleep that night. Instead, we sat together on my bed, anxiously waiting for sunrise. The next day, we confronted our dad again, but he brushed it off, still convinced it was just animals and the noises of an old house settling. Frustrated but determined, we took matters into our own hands, installing a sturdy deadbolt on the attic door. From that day on, we both began locking our bedroom doors every night, and I stopped opening my window after dark entirely. After that terrifying night, the activity gradually faded. We occasionally still heard strange creaks or faint footsteps in the attic, but nothing nearly as violent or frightening ever happened again. Yet, the sense of unease lingered, a constant, low-level hum of dread that reminded us of what we would experience. Both Chloe and I always felt watched whenever we were home alone, especially after dark. About a year later, our dad announced he planned to sell the house. Chloe and I could not have been happier. Despite loving the spacious property, neither of us ever felt truly safe there anymore. A young family eventually purchased it, seemingly unaware of its strange history. We packed up quickly, relieved to move forward and start fresh. Our new home was close to town, a smaller and simpler house, and from the very first night, the difference was clear. It was peaceful, quiet, and entirely free from strange occurrences. No more unexplained footsteps, no more doors opening by themselves. Life slowly returned to normal, and we began sleeping soundly again. Years later, out of curiosity, I mentioned our experiences to a neighbor who had lived near our old house for decades. She hesitated at first, but finally revealed that before my father bought the property, the land had once belonged to a troubled old woman, known locally for her reclusive and erratic behavior. She had reportedly been unstable, prone to violent outbursts, and had died mysteriously decades earlier, alone in the old cottage that had originally been built there. Locals had always whispered that her ghost lingered in the area, though my father had dismissed such stories as nonsense when he purchased the land. Today, the memories still send chills through me whenever I recall that night. My sister and I rarely talked about it, preferring to leave it buried in the past. But I will never forget the feeling of that violent slam against my door, the sound of frantic footsteps overhead, and the absolute certainty that we were not alone in that house. I started babysitting for the Hayes family in Boulder, Colorado, back in February of 2020. At the time, I was juggling a part-time administrative job at a small logistics company in Lakewood. My boss, Mr. Davison, was honestly one of the nicest people I would ever work for. He always let me clock out early if I needed to pick up groceries, never questioned my lunch breaks, and even surprised me with coffee some mornings. It was one of those rare workplaces where I actually felt appreciated, which was a relief because I would had some incredibly stressful jobs in the past. With Mr. Davison being so understanding about flexible hours, I decided to take on additional work as a babysitter. I figured I could use the extra cash to help pay off some of my lingering student loans. That is how I ended up working for Mr. Hayes a couple of nights a week. He was a single father named Jonathan. His wife had passed away a year earlier in a tragic car accident, which left him raising his 4-year-old daughter, Lily, on his own. He put in long hours at a firm downtown and needed someone reliable to watch Lily when he worked late. Lily was a bright, inquisitive little girl who loved coloring books and her collection of stuffed animals. She had an impressive vocabulary for a 4-year-old and was always asking me questions about anything and everything. Whenever I arrived, she would run up to me with a big smile, excited to show me her latest drawing or ask if we could bake cookies. On this particular night, March 4th, if my memory serves me right, Jonathan had a big project at work. He apologized as he rushed out the door around 6 p.m. and saying he probably would not be back until after midnight. I told him not to worry. I would make sure Lily had dinner and got to bed on time. We spent the evening as we usually did, coloring pictures of animals, playing with her blocks, and watching a short kids show before bed. Lily seemed extra affectionate that night, climbing onto my lap and asking for hugs. I chalked it up to her missing her dad, or maybe even her mom, though she did not talk about that much. After her nighttime bath around 8:30, I brought her up to her room, which was decorated with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Lily kept yawning, so I tucked her in, read her a quick story, and told her good night. Half an hour later, I was settled in the living room, flipping through channels on the TV, when Lily called out from upstairs. I heard her little voice echo down the hall, so I set the remote aside and went to check on her. She was standing by her bedroom window, pointing at the glass. "Lily, what is wrong?" I asked gently. She looked up at me, her expression anxious. "There's a man outside," she said in a trembling voice. He was staring at me through the window. I tried to reassure her. "Honey, there is no one there," I said, taking a quick peek outside. The backyard was dimly lit by a single motion-activated light, and I did not see a soul. We were in a pretty quiet neighborhood, mostly middle-class families with well-kept lawns, not the sort of place where people loitered in backyards. Lily still looked terrified, though, so I walked her back to her bed and reminded her it was time to sleep. I promised to take a better look in a minute. She insisted I close the curtains all the way, and after I did, she finally lay back down. I went back downstairs, a little uneasy. Lily was not the type to invent scary stories for attention, but I figured maybe she saw a shadow or got spooked by a stray cat or something. To ease my own nerves, I double-checked the front and back doors, making sure they were locked. Then I sat on the sofa with the TV volume low, trying not to worry. Less than 15 minutes later, I heard Lily crying upstairs. It was not the usual whimper or fuss you get from a child. It was a frightened, urgent cry. My heart pounded as I sprinted up the stairs, nearly tripping on the top step. I found her wide-eyed and tear-streaked, sitting up in bed. She managed to say between sobs, "He is back. He is looking at me." I glanced at the window. The curtains were drawn, but a tiny sliver of the outside was still visible where the drapes did not fully meet. Everything looked dark and still. I tried to keep calm for Lily's sake, but my hands were already trembling. If she was this frightened, something had definitely scared her. I hugged her, whispered it was going to be okay, and laid her back down. Then, in a sudden burst of worry and maybe a bit of anger, I decided to do a quick check around the outside of the house. If someone was messing around, I wanted them gone. I grabbed a kitchen knife, probably an overreaction, but in that moment it felt necessary. Pushing open the back door, I stepped out into the cold night. My breath came out in white puffs. The yard was silent, surrounded by a tall wooden fence. The motion sensor light blinked on, revealing nothing but a few scattered toys on the grass and a slight breeze rustling the tree branches. I walked around the side of the house, checked the windows, the driveway, and even looked behind the trash bins. Still nothing. Relieved but still on edge, I came back into the back door, locking it securely behind me. Just as I turned the deadbolt, I heard a loud rattle on the front door. It was like someone was jiggling the handle, aggressively trying to get in. My heart slammed against my chest. I rushed to the living room to look through the peephole. The hallway light was off, so I had to squint. There he was, a tall man, maybe in his 40s, wearing dirty jeans and a stained hoodie. His face was partially turned away, but I could see enough to notice that his hair was matted and his eyes were wide with a kind of frantic, desperate energy. It felt like time slowed down. I gripped the knife so hard my knuckles ached. He started banging on the door, rocking it on its hinges. I could almost hear Lily's shaky breathing upstairs, even though she had to be half a hallway away. I swallowed hard and yelled through the door that I was calling the police if he did not leave immediately. The banging stopped. Silence for a second. Then, to my absolute horror, he tried turning the handle again, this time using more force, his shoulder pressed against the door. I scrambled for my phone in my back pocket, my fingers fumbling as I dialed 911. My voice shook when I explained the situation to the operator. She told me to stay calm and stay on the line while officers were dispatched. The man must have heard me say police, because he suddenly darted away from the door and disappeared into the darkness. I stayed on the call, locked in place, not daring to move. Within minutes, though it felt like an eternity, I saw the flashing lights of a patrol car through the window. By the time the officers came knocking, my hands were shaking so badly I struggled to pull back the deadbolt. When I finally let them in, Lily ran downstairs, sobbing, and clung to my leg. The police did a thorough search of the yard. One officer eventually shouted that he had found someone crouched under a thick patch of bushes near the back fence. The man was half hiding, half curled up, glaring at them with a confused expression. They handcuffed him while he mumbled incoherently. I watched from the doorstep, clutching Lily to me, torn between overwhelming fear and a profound sense of relief. After they arrested the intruder, one of the officers took my statement. He seemed genuinely sympathetic. Then he told me something that made my stomach twist into a cold knot. The man had escaped from a mental health facility earlier that day, just a few miles away. Apparently, he was considered dangerous due to his unpredictable behavior. Though he would never use a weapon before, they were still trying to piece together how he would ended up in Jonathan's neighborhood. Jonathan got home about an hour later, visibly alarmed. He knelt down and hugged Lily tight, apologizing to both of us for leaving that night, though it was not his fault. He was just grateful she was safe. The police left, promising to keep us updated about the man's situation. Lily eventually fell asleep in her dad's room, clutching one of her stuffed animals. As for me, I could not shake the image of that man's silhouette by the window. It still gives me chills to remember how certain Lily was that she saw him, and how, when I looked, he was already gone, waiting for his moment to strike. Even now, years later, whenever I hear a strange tap at a window or sense movement in the yard, my mind jumps back to that night in Boulder. The worst part is not knowing exactly why he fixated on that house, or if he was just looking for any open door. Sometimes I wonder if he remembers me and Lily, or if we were just nameless figures in the blur of his mental confusion. Ben and I started our YouTube channel, American Urban Explorers, about 6 months ago. We were driven all over western Pennsylvania, filming deserted factories in Aliquippa, the skeletons of old steel mills near Pittsburgh, and crumbling farmhouses we found deep in rural backroads. Our viewers loved the mystery of these forgotten places, and we loved the thrill of discovery. So when we heard rumors about an abandoned elementary school in a small town called Blackwood, just a quick drive north of the city, we knew we had to check it out. The old school, formerly known as Blackwood Elementary, stood at the edge of town near a set of train tracks that had not been used in decades. Its paint was peeling, its windows were shattered, and graffiti covered the brick walls like a second skin. Locals whispered that it was haunted, especially after dark. Some claimed they saw lights flicker inside when no one was there. Others said they heard the faint sound of children's laughter or footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. Most people in town avoided the place altogether, but for our channel, it was the perfect spot to film an eerie exploration video. One cool autumn afternoon, we parked our car on a quiet side street, far from the school's main gates. The November breeze rustled dead leaves along the pavement. We packed up our camera gear, checked our batteries, and walked toward the property's chain link fence. Barbed wire zigzagged along the top, but someone had cut a hole near the corner. It looked big enough for us to slip through. I remember pausing for a moment, my heart thumping. Something about the building felt off. The silence around it was almost too heavy, like the school was holding its breath, waiting. Ben, on the other hand, seemed eager. He would always been the braver one. He gave me a thumbs up, and I steeled myself. We crawled through the gap in the fence and made our way toward the main entrance. The front doors were boarded up, but one of the plywood sheets hung loose, leaving just enough space to squeeze inside. As we stepped into the foyer, a musty, cloying smell hit us, a mix of mold, rotting wood, and years of neglect. A weak shaft of sunlight slipped through the cracks in the boards, illuminating dust motes that danced lazily through the still air. I clicked on my flashlight and handed Ben the camera. "Welcome to Blackwood Elementary," he whispered for the video, panning the camera across the decaying corridor. Our footsteps echoed as we ventured deeper, our boots crunching over broken glass and scattered debris. Old lockers lined the walls, their metal doors twisted and rusted. Some were hanging open, revealing crumpled papers, tattered books, and even an old pair of sneakers someone had left behind. We passed a faded mural on one wall. It showed smiling kids playing under a bright, cartoon sun, but the paint was chipped and black mold crawled over their faces like a disease. I felt an uneasy tightness in my chest as I stared at those half-vanished smiles. It was like stepping back into a forgotten piece of history, both fascinating and deeply frightening. After exploring a few of the classrooms, we found the main office. The door was cracked open, so we slipped inside. Broken computer monitors and tangled wires littered the floor. A toppled file cabinet had spilled yellowed papers across what remained of a dirty, stained carpet. Digging through the mess, Ben found a student roster from the late 1990s. It listed teachers' names, class schedules, and a handful of phone numbers. We snapped some photos and kept filming. Our subscribers love seeing old documents and personal touches, things that made these abandoned places feel real. Then came a noise, a dull thud from somewhere down the hallway. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. Ben swung the camera in the direction of the sound, but we saw nothing but darkness. An uneasy chill skidded up my spine. Maybe it was a loose door slamming in the wind, I thought, but the air was still. There was no breeze, not even a draft. "We should check it out," Ben said, mustering his usual courage. Slowly, we crept back into the hallway. The overhead lights, long dead, left everything in deep shadow. Our flashlight beams flickered against the peeling wallpaper. Each step on the old linoleum sent up a hollow, lonely echo. Then, from around a corner, I heard another noise. This time, it was like something scraping against the floor. My stomach twisted into a knot. We turned the corner, and there it was, a faint, flickering glow coming from a classroom near the end of the hall. Ben glanced at me, his eyebrows raised. We edged toward the doorway, the camera still rolling. That is when we saw someone inside. A man stood there, illuminated by the soft light of a small flashlight, or maybe a lantern resting on a desk. His back was to us, his shoulders hunched. He wore a dirty jacket and torn jeans, and his hair was long and matted. At first, I wondered if he was homeless, using the school for shelter. But something about his posture felt wrong, almost too still, like a predator waiting patiently. Ben took a hesitant step forward, quietly clearing his throat to let the stranger know we were there. The man turned around slowly. His eyes were wide and unfocused, as if he were seeing something we could not. For a second, no one spoke. The silence was thick and suffocating. Then, the man's face twisted into a wide, unnatural grin that made every hair on the back of my neck stand up. He started moving toward us, slow but deliberate, his steps shuffling on the debris-strewn floor. Ben backed away, the camera shaking in his hands. I wanted to call out, to say something, but fear had clogged my throat, turning my voice to lead. The man kept coming. We turned and bolted. We fled down the corridor, our flashlights bouncing wildly against the walls. Behind us, I could hear him running, his footsteps slapping the linoleum in a steady, relentless pursuit. We reached the foyer and scrambled out through the opening in the boarded-up door, tripping over each other in our haste. Outside, the evening light was fading, and the air felt colder than before. We sprinted toward the fence, hearts pounding, adrenaline surging through our veins. When we got a hole, Ben slid through first, and I followed, cutting my arm on the jagged edge of the wire. A sharp pain shot through me, but I did not stop. As soon as we were on the other side, we kept running until we reached the car. We jumped in, locked the doors, and started the engine. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. Ben looked back at the school, but I refused to turn around. I just wanted to be as far away from that place and that man as possible. For days after, neither of us could sleep well. Our video footage showed only glimpses of the man's shape and the frantic blurs we ran. We debated whether to upload it at all. In the end, we decided to share a shorter edit, leaving out the most terrifying moments. We titled it Abandoned School Nightmare in Pennsylvania, and it quickly became one of our channel's most watched videos. Local authorities eventually boarded up the school more securely, warning people to stay out. A few months later, the town decided to demolish the building. Ben and I drove by on the day the bulldozers rolled in. We watched from a distance as the ancient brick walls crumbled, sending up clouds of dust. It should have felt like closure. Yet, it only made the memories sharper, like a nightmare that decides to stay with you long after dawn. 2 years ago, on a Saturday night in February, in Summit County, Colorado, I was driving to a nightclub to meet up with some of my friends. Saturday nights were almost always for the boys. We did this just about every weekend, unless one of us was busy. I usually had fun, but honestly, I sometimes felt pressure to go. That Saturday, I had spent most of the day at my grandparents' house, which was not too far from my own place. After a nice day with them, I drove home. I took a quick shower, dressed in nicer clothes, slipped on a pair of fancy shoes, grabbed my phone, wallet, and keys, and headed out the front door. I climbed into my SUV, started the engine, and began driving down my familiar road. What I did not know at that moment was that this would be the last time I ever drove a car. The nearest highway from my house was only about 5 minutes away, so I got on quickly and started cruising at around 70 miles per hour, matching the flow of traffic. After driving for about 15 to 20 minutes along the highway, I noticed a police car on the other side of the road. It was facing the opposite direction, parked in the left lane. My first thought was that the officer was waiting for speeding cars to give out tickets. I wished that had been the reality, but sadly it was not. Since I was driving an SUV, my visibility of the ground immediately in front of me was not very good. It was also dark out, and the headlights of oncoming traffic occasionally blinded me for brief moments. I continued driving at the same speed, listening to some music, my mind drifting to thoughts of the evening ahead, when suddenly I felt a heavy, sickening impact beneath my vehicle. My heart dropped immediately. I knew instantly that I had run over something large, possibly a person. My hands started shaking uncontrollably. I quickly pulled over to the side of the highway, turning on my hazard lights. The moment I fully stopped, a wave of panic and dread washed over me. I could hardly breathe. Tears flooded my eyes, and I found myself screaming uncontrollably. Trembling, I knew I had to do something quickly, but it was impossible to turn around and check to see myself. It was a high-speed interstate, and going against traffic could end tragically. With shaking hands, I called 911, desperate and terrified. The operator calmly told me they already knew about the situation because an officer on the scene was radioing in what had just happened. I asked her if I should come to the police station, and she said it would be fine. My mind was racing, and my heart was pounding painfully in my chest. I struggled to regain my composure and drove slowly and carefully to the station. At the police station, I filled out forms, wrote statements, and spoke briefly with an officer who assured me they would be in contact over the coming days. By the time I left, my phone had several missed calls and texts from my friends, wondering where I was, feeling sick to my stomach. I called my friend Bob, telling him I would not be coming to the club and explaining what had just happened. He was shocked and worried about me, but he understood and told me to take care of myself first. When I finally arrived home, I felt physically and emotionally drained. Sleep overtook me as soon as my head touched the pillow. The following week, I learned more about the person I had hit from news reports and police interviews. His name was Kyle Evans. Kyle was 28 years old and had a history of minor legal troubles. He had been pulled over by Deputy Reyes after an officer discovered his vehicle had expired tags. Kyle panicked, gave the deputy a fake name, and when confronted about the lie, he ran. Deputy Reyes chased Kyle to the edge of the interstate and deployed his taser. Kyle fell onto the pavement just seconds before I drove by and, tragically, ran him over. Kyle died at the scene. The heartbreaking reality of this incident impacted so many people. His family was devastated and filed a lawsuit against the deputy and the police department. After a lengthy investigation, the district attorney concluded that the deputy's actions were lawful. Neither the officer nor I was charged or fined, but the weight of this tragedy still haunted me daily. In the weeks and months after the accident, my life changed dramatically. I became withdrawn and avoided seeing my friends. Though they understood, I still felt guilty for abandoning them. I found it impossible to drive again. Every time I approached the driver's seat of a vehicle, I felt sick. Eventually, I stopped even trying. My friends or family drove me places when needed, and when they could not, I relied on Uber or buses. I started seeing a counselor to talk through my guilt and trauma. Therapy helped me process what happened, but it did not erase the memories. The details still replayed in my mind, the images, the sounds, the sensations, all vivid, especially late at night. I struggled with nightmares for months, waking in cold sweats, terrified. To cope, I decided to meet Kyle's family. It was the hardest thing I would ever done. I met his parents and younger sister, explained everything I remembered from that night, and apologized deeply, sincerely, and emotionally. Kyle's family listened tearfully, but forgave me. They acknowledged that Kyle had made mistakes that led to that night, but it did not make losing him any easier. Our meeting was a pivotal moment in my recovery. Although painful, it helped lift some of the weight off my shoulders, knowing Kyle's family did not blame me for the tragic accident. Over time, I slowly rebuilt my life, forming stronger bond with family and friends, and appreciating life's fragility more profoundly. I dedicated time to volunteering at local community centers, speaking to teenagers about choices, consequences, and responsibility, hoping to prevent others from experiencing similar tragedies. But despite therapy and support of loved ones, driving remained impossible for me. I decided to move closer to my workplace, a small office where I worked in customer support, reducing the need to travel. I chose an apartment near a bus stop and a convenience store, simplifying my life. Occasionally, I felt isolated or frustrated by my inability to overcome the trauma fully. Friends gently encouraged me to start driving again, but the thought alone filled me with anxiety and fear. I explained to them that my life was manageable without driving. They respected my feelings, and eventually, the topic faded into the background. The accident changed my perspective profoundly. Every day became a gift. I learned the importance of forgiveness, compassion, and gratitude. Still, the regret and sadness lingered beneath the surface. I visited the site of the accident 1 year after it happened, bringing flowers in Kyle's memory. It was an emotional moment. As I stood quietly, hearing the distant roar of cars rushing past, I felt sadness, but also hope, reflecting on my journey through trauma, guilt, forgiveness, and ultimately, healing. Life is not always predictable or fair. I learned that in the most challenging way possible. The experience taught me valuable lessons about empathy, understanding, and resilience. I never forgot Kyle Evans. He became a constant reminder of life's delicate balance and how quickly everything can change. This is something that happened to me when I was in the 7th grade back in 2016, living in Chicago. I had this math teacher named MS. Albright. She was not exactly my favorite teacher. I felt like she was not the nicest to me in my class, and she would give us a load of homework that was like homework for a senior in college. Anyway, let's get to the point of this story. It was a Friday after school, which was the last day before we had a 1-week break because of the President's Day holidays. I was on my way home, riding on a school bus that I would take to and from school every day. As I was halfway home, the bus stopped at a red light. As we were waiting for the light to turn green, I saw something that caught my eye. I was looking out the window, listening to music with my headphones on. To the left of me, I saw my teacher, MS. Albright. She was directly looking at me, and she looked so uptight. I felt so unnerved. I was wondering if she was following the bus, but that was highly unlikely. It was probably just a coincidence. Also, the window was pretty dark, so she might have been unsure if it was me or not. The light then turned green, and we drove away. It was weird seeing someone I knew outside of school, considering that Chicago is a huge city. I got home and was able to move past what I saw earlier. The next evening, my family and I, along with my cousins, went to see a Muse concert in Indiana. Sometime during the concert, MS. Albright appeared again. This time, she was on the stage of the arena. She just appeared like magic, looking straight at me with the same facial expression from the day before. This had to have been a hallucination, because if it was not, everyone in the crowd would notice her, and the security guards would escort her off the stage. I felt less uneasy now that I was coming to terms with the fact that this was not real. So I ignored it and continued to have fun, grooving along to the music. That is when she disappeared again. MS. Albright did not appear again until the Friday of the next week. On that Friday, my family and I went to spend the weekend hiking at Starved Rock State Park. About 40 minutes into the hike, MS. Albright showed up once again. I was not scared anymore. It was getting annoying, and I did not know how to get rid of this hallucination. I was contemplating my next move when an idea flew into my brain. So, what I did was, I ran to where MS, Albright, was, and once I got to where she was standing, she was gone, just like the wind. My family looked at me as if I was on drugs or something. My mother asked me if I was all right. I came up with the excuse that I had to get some energy out. My mother then said, "Okay then," as she still kept the same facial expression. I did not want to tell them what I was seeing. I was just way too embarrassed. Plus, they probably would not have believed me anyway. We continued the hike until we reached the top of the mountain. We camped out that night somewhere in the mountains, and then the next night, my parents booked an Airbnb to stay at. The house that we stayed at was fairly big. I got my own bedroom. During the next night, I fell asleep at around 11 p.m. I had a dream about MS. Albright. The dream was about me coming back on the president's week break, and she ordered the entire math class to kill me. I pleaded with them not to kill me and screamed the word no over and over. And then a classmate of mine pulled out a pair of scissors from their pocket, and they were sticking it through my heart. Before the scissors could fully pierce my heart, I woke up, and I saw MS, Albright, like an inch away from my face. She was laughing and screaming like a hyena, while she had such an angry expression on her face, like she was going to kill me. That is when I started screaming and crying for my parents as loud as I could. Both of my parents came rushing into my room and asked what was wrong. I could no longer hide what I had been seeing for the past week. I had to tell them the truth. I told them everything, from when the hallucination started the prior Friday on the school bus, the 2 other instances, and just minutes ago when I woke up from a nightmare. They looked really scared and concerned. They could tell I was being serious by my crying. My father said he was so sorry, and he asked me, "Why did not you tell us sooner?" I said to him that I thought you guys would not have believed me and would have thought that I was just crying wolf. My mother then said to me that I could sleep in their room tonight, so I could calm down and would not have to be scared anymore. And so I slept in their room for the rest of the night. The next morning, on the drive back home to the city, I had a long discussion with my parents about how I should not return to that school because of what had happened this whole week. I was scared that these hallucinations would continue if I stayed at the school. I also wanted to transfer to another school right away. They seemed hesitant to give me a straight answer, and they both said that they would come up with a decision in the nighttime and said that I was allowed to miss school tomorrow, regardless of what decision they would make. When it reached nighttime, they said I was allowed to transfer to another school if I agreed to see a psychologist once every week. I told them, no problem. When I started at my new school, my friends kept asking me through social media and texts about why I left my old school. I made up a lie, saying that my parents wanted me to go to a more well-known school. Believe it or not, they all actually believed that lie. I told them the real reason only stays between me, my family, and my psychologist. Speaking of my psychologist, I was able to talk about all of my problems, including the hallucinations about my old teacher, MS, Albright. That really helped me, and the psychologist was able to prescribe me some medicine to help me through every day, to make sure that I was no longer seeing stuff in my head. And it all worked. I never saw MS, Albright, with my own eyes ever again, nor did I see any hallucinations again. I still wonder to this day what may have caused that specific hallucination. I guess we will never know. A few years ago, I worked in private security out of Cleveland, Ohio. Last October, the agency assigned me to watch over this old, half-burnt mansion on the outskirts of town. The place had gone up in flames years ago, and a couple people had reportedly died inside. After that, it was abandoned, left as a charred husk with broken windows and a warped, sagging roof. Local kids spread rumors about ghosts, but I did not believe in all that. To me, it was just another night shift. The property sat on a large estate with a tall, wrought iron fence around the perimeter. My job was to patrol the grounds a few times each night and make sure no squatters or vandals sneaked in. Pretty straightforward, really. The first few shifts were quiet, just me circling with a flashlight, listening to the wind rustling through the dead trees. Then, about a week in, I was on duty around 2 a.m. It was colder than usual, and I remember my breath fogging up in the night air. I stopped near the front gate, scanning the upper windows of the mansion. Suddenly, I heard something, a sharp, distant cry. It lasted maybe 3 seconds before cutting off abruptly. At first, I thought it was an animal, but there was something about the pitch, the urgency, that felt too human. I tried shining my flashlight toward the house, but from where I stood, I could not see anything unusual. Part of me wanted to go in and check, but I would have been told to avoid entering the building alone. It was not structurally sound, and my boss insisted we leave it to the police if we heard anything suspicious. So I stayed outside, feeling uneasy until sunrise. By morning, I had convinced myself it must have been some stray cat or a trick of the wind. Over the next few days, I could not shake the memory of that scream. Each night, I found myself walking closer to the entrance, listening more carefully. Then, on a Wednesday, I spotted something that stopped me cold. While circling the rear of the property, I glanced up at the top floor. A faint light flickered behind the soot-stained glass, like someone was moving around with a flashlight. That should not have been possible. There was no electricity in that building, and the upper levels were essentially gutted by the fire. I stood there for what felt like a full minute, watching as the light flickered in and out of the window. Then a figure appeared, just a silhouette, but definitely a person. They moved slowly, almost swaying, before stepping away from view. My stomach lurched. It was 1:30 in the morning, and that place was supposed to be empty. This time, curiosity overrode caution. I radioed in to let dispatch know I was investigating. I climbed the creaking porch stairs and pushed the front door open. The inside smelled of ash and old, damp wood. My flashlight beam skimmed over scorched walls, sagging floorboards, and piles of debris. Every step echoed in the darkness. I moved through a couple of charred rooms, coughing as dust filled the air. Then I heard a soft rustling behind me. My skin prickled. I swung the flashlight around. Nothing, just a tattered curtain drifting near a shattered window. Trying to calm myself, I kept walking deeper into the house. That is when I felt it, this unmistakable presence behind me, like someone hovering just out of reach. I spun around, flashlight trembling in my hand. Standing there was a man in a white gown, not a glowing ghost or anything bizarre, more like a hospital gown, worn and grimy, just hanging off his frame. His face was half hidden by the gloom, but I could see the whites of his eyes. Instinct took over. I bolted, practically crashing into the hallway walls as I dashed back the way I came. I do not remember breathing or thinking. I just remember the pounding in my chest. The front door was still half open, so I barreled out, nearly stumbling off the porch steps. Outside, I scrambled for my phone and called the police. I kept looking back, half expecting that man to appear in the doorway, but he never did. The cops arrived with a couple of squad cars. They looked skeptical when I told them my story, like they would heard this kind of thing before. Still, they humored me, and we waited until daylight to do a thorough search. I followed them in, along with an older detective named Miles, who seemed more patient than the rest. We inspected the rooms I would walk through, but nothing was immediately obvious. After hours of poking around, one of the officers found a concealed door behind a collapsed bookcase leading down to the basement. The staircase looked newer than the rest of the house, as if it had been reinforced. The smell that hit us was enough to make my eyes water, a mix of mold, damp concrete, and something else I could not place. Down there, we found 3 men alive, breathing, and startled by our arrival. They were wanted in connection with several robberies in the area. One of them lunged at the cops, but was quickly restrained. Tucked away in the corner was a terrified man, tied to a chair, gagged and bound. His face was gaunt, and he had bruises on his arms. It hit me then. That screaming I heard on my first night probably belonged to him. He would have been stuck in this basement, pleading for help while I stood just yards away outside. The police arrested the 3 men on the spot and freed the hostage. As they escorted the criminals upstairs, I noticed that none of them wore a white gown. They all had on jeans and sweatshirts. I asked the detective if maybe they had an accomplice who got away. He could not say for sure. One of the suspects admitted they were using the abandoned house as a hideout, but he would not talk about anyone wearing white. I still think about that moment when I turned and saw the figure. Was it a hostage in a makeshift outfit? Did I mistake something in the dark? Or was there someone else lurking? Someone who did not want to be found? I'm not sure I will ever have a concrete answer. But whenever I drive by the place there is yellow tape around it now, I remember those eyes watching me in the darkness. And I wonder if the true story of what happened in that house goes way deeper than we will ever know. This happened to me when I was 18 years old. I was on a trip with my parents and a friend of mine, whom we can call Maya. This story takes place in Norway. When we were on a road trip, Maya, my parents, and I were going to make a domestic trip, and we were having an 8-hour drive from home. The plan was that we would visit a theme park and stay at a campsite, but we had not booked any. The day came, and we arrived at the city where the theme park was, but we were going to go there the upcoming day, so we would have to sleep in the tents we brought with us in our car. My dad looked up a nearby campsite on the internet, and we found a good one really close. My dad called the camp's phone number, but unfortunately, that day was the same day as a big soccer tournament, so there was no space left for us, since we needed to make sure to book before, and there were a lot of people there. My dad called around, and we did not find any campsites with a good price and near the theme park. So our only choice was to find a camping spot in nature. We set up the GPS for the closest park in the forest, so we did not have to pay any parking fines. We found a spot in a nature reserve. At the time we arrived, there were people there to ask if it was okay to set up our tents here, and if it was a good place to stay. A woman that was hiking told us it was a good place to sleep, and there were no parking attendants. So we made our decision to sleep in a small and lonely gravel parking lot. We were surrounded by forest, and a 10-minute walk away was a beach. At first, we thought we wanted to sleep at the beach, but something told me that it would be better if we set up our tents in the parking lot. When we first got out of the car and were going to set up our shelter for the night, I noticed a lonely car further away from us in the parking lot. I thought it looked in a bad condition, and I saw there were no people in it. But I thought it was strange, because now it was the evening, so there were no people out at the beach or hiking in the woods by this time. But I thought no more about it. I helped my parents set up our tents. My parents were sleeping in one tent and Maya and I in the other, while both of the tents were next to each other, close. We were finally done struggling to build it, so Maya and I made it cozy while watching IU2B and eating snacks. The time was around 11 p.m. We were going to try to sleep at a decent time, so we did not have to be tired for the upcoming day. After a good time of eating snacks and laughing, we finally were going to sleep, now around 12 a.m. At this time, my parents were asleep in their own tent. We were on our phones, scrolling some top before going to bed, when we suddenly heard a metal sound in the parking lot. I heard it was a shovel that was thrown down on the gravel ground. Maya and I got really scared and jumped. We asked ourselves what that sound was. We chose to stay silent and just listen to what was next, since none of us dared to peek out the tent window. It was coming from the same direction as the abandoned car was parked. We heard that what I was thinking was a shovel was thrown in the trunk of the car, and then the person throwing it was slamming the trunk shut. While sitting in silence, we heard the car speed off fast, like it were trying to get away fast. Maya and I were both scared and confused. I texted a friend from a nearby city about where we were staying, and he told me that the beach we were close to was a dangerous place, and many organized criminals have been doing many illegal things there. We did not know any of this before. When my friend told me that, I felt cold, and I got really creeped out. There was around 10 minutes of silence since the car sped off. Maya and I were silent and had calmed ourselves down a little when we heard the loudest, blood-curdling scream ever from a male. Maya and I were horrified, and I texted my mom that we heard a loud scream from the woods. I woke her up by calling her phone, so she would answer my text. Neither one of my parents had heard the scream because they were asleep, so she told me it was probably nothing serious going on. At this point, I was so scared, and I could not think of any normal situations a person would scream like this. Maya and I crawled under the blankets, scared of not knowing what would happen next. The minutes felt like hours while we were not being able to sleep, even though it was midnight. We were so tired. So we tried to sleep, even though the screams and the thought of the speeding car. It was dead silent now. My blood was suddenly turned ice when I heard footsteps walking around our tents. Silent, stealthy footsteps. Maya and I sat up in fear. I laid down my phone, so the person outside did not see the screen light up the tent. I heard my own pulse, and my heart was beating so fast. There was no logical reason for this person to walk around our tents in the middle of the forest. Maya and I were sitting frozen in fear under our blankets while hearing the person walk first around our tent, then move to my parents, and then walk around our car next to our tents. I heard the person stop outside and look at our tents. The footsteps stopped, and then I heard the car from earlier come back. The headlights of the cars lit up our tents. So Maya and I lay down from our sitting position fast, so they would not see us sitting, knowing we had heard and seen them. I gathered my courage to peek out the small window, and the car door slammed shut, and they drove off again. I felt relieved that the person was gone now. Around 5 minutes later, I heard another car approaching fast. I looked out, and I saw it was a police car, speeding down the same way the old car was going. Nothing more happened after that. Maya and my friend were still shaken up by the situation, so we wanted to sit in the car and lock the doors so we would feel more safe. I was awake until around 5 a.m., just watching out at the forest if there were any more things that were going to happen. Maya fell asleep in the seat next to me. After around an hour in the car, we went back to our tent, and we fell asleep of pure exhaustion. We woke up around 9 a.m., both tired and exhausted. I told my mom what we heard, and she had heard the footsteps too. But when the person was next to my parents' tent, there was heavy breathing from the person, like you would hear in a phone call in a scary movie. My mom got scared too, but my dad was asleep the whole time, so we had to tell the story to him. We immediately packed our things in the tents, leaving the place as fast as we could. None of us wanted to be there for one more minute. We had a good time at the theme park. But later that evening, I searched about that forest we were staying in. Not a long time before us, there was a murder of a man there, stabbed to death in debt to a gang. And 2 more men were missing from that exact beach and have still not been found. So I thought to myself, what if the person walking around our tent was a dangerous person, looking to see if there were any people there awake, witnessing what was happening, and I got chills afterwards just by the thought of what could have happened. After days, I still think, who made those screams? And why were they using a shovel in the middle of the night in a forest? And the police cars are chasing right after. I had always been fascinated by ghost stories. My friends and I loved to share spooky tales during our sleepovers. One night, we decided to take things up a notch. We planned to visit the abandoned graveyard at the edge of our small town in rural Massachusetts. It was rumored to be haunted by spirits dating back to the early 1800s, and nobody dared go there after dark. Being young and curious, we thought it would be fun. It was a chilly October evening when we set out, just a few days before Halloween. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of purple and orange before disappearing entirely. We rode our bikes past rows of old Victorian-style homes, eventually leaving the glow of the streetlights behind as we neared the outskirts. A wooden sign, half hidden by overgrown weeds, marked the entrance to property, Blackwood Cemetery, established in 1812. The sign was so faded that the letters were barely legible. The cool night air brushed against our cheeks as we parked our bikes near a gnarled oak tree. My friend Emily checked her phone's flashlight, while Liam tried to steady his shaky hands. I could feel my excitement and fear mingling in the pit of my stomach. The graveyard gate was wrought iron, its intricate patterns rusted and bent in places. It loudly creaked when Liam pushed it open, echoing in the stillness. We slipped inside, our feet stepping onto a path lined with gravestones that leaned at odd angles. Some headstones bore names from centuries past, their inscriptions worn down by wind and rain. Others stood upright, surprisingly well preserved, with elegant carvings of angels or ivy. Up above, the moon hung like a silver lantern, illuminating the scene just enough for us to see our surroundings in a ghostly glow. We followed the path deeper into the cemetery, passing weathered statues that seemed to watch us with lifeless eyes. A few yards ahead, an ancient maple towered over a cluster of graves, its knotted branches stretched out like twisted arms, casting strange shadows that danced with every breeze. We tried cracking small jokes, hoping to break the tension, but the silence around us felt too heavy, almost like the earth was holding its breath. At the center of the cemetery stood a crumbling mausoleum. Its marble walls were cracked, and fallen leaves had gathered along the steps. A small plaque near the entrance read, "In Memoriam, the Hawthorne Family, 1839. Stories around town claimed that the Hawthornes had perished in a tragic fire, and their spirits never found rest." We exchanged uneasy glances. This was the place that local legends said was the most haunted of all. Curiosity got the better of us. We approached the mausoleum with hesitant steps, Emily's flashlight guiding the way. The heavy door was slightly ajar, revealing a dark space within. I could smell damp stone and something faintly sweet, like rotting flowers left from a long-ago funeral. We pushed the door open a bit wider and entered, hearts pounding. Inside, the air felt heavier, as though we had stepped underwater. Our flashlights revealed stone walls covered in a thin layer of moss and a few cracked marble slabs where coffins might have once rested. Cobwebs hung from the corners, shifting with every motion we made. Then Liam froze, his beam of light fixed on something in the far corner. A figure stood there, motionless at first, dressed in a long, tattered white garment. My heart thundered so loudly I could hear my pulse. The figure had a hood or veil obscuring its face, making it impossible to see any features. We all stood still, too petrified to speak or even breathe loudly. Suddenly, the figure lifted its head. Two faintly glowing eyes seemed to reflect our flashlight beams, piercing the darkness. A soft, rasping sound filled the silence, like a hushed moan. It was enough to jolt us out of our paralysis. "Go," Emily hissed, her voice trembling. We turned and bolted for the door, shoving it open as the figure took a halting step forward. I nearly tripped over a broken slab as I scrambled out, my heart thumping in my ears. Outside, the night air felt shockingly cold against my flushed face. We sprinted back down the path, our feet pounding the earth, our flashlights bouncing wildly across the headstones. Branches scraped my arms as we tore past the old maple tree. I could sense something behind us, whether it was our imaginations or the figure from the mausoleum. I could not be sure. The dark silhouettes of the graves blurred into a single, ominous mass, and I found myself holding my breath, half expecting a ghostly hand to grab my shoulder. Finally, we saw the rusted gate looming ahead. We flung it open and dashed out onto the roadside, nearly collapsing in a heap beside our bikes. My lungs burned, and for a moment, I could not find the words to speak. Liam's face was pale, and Emily's eyes were wide with terror. None of us dared to look back toward the graveyard. Slowly, we got on our bikes and pedaled as fast as we could, leaving Blackwood Cemetery behind. We did not stop until we were back under the glow of street lamps in town, where the sounds of distant cars and the hum of electricity felt comfortingly normal. When we finally had the nerve to speak, we all asked the same question. What did we see back there? None of us had a real answer. We only knew that the stillness, the hooded figure, and those eerie, glowing eyes were unlike anything we would ever experience before.